Once I thought to write a history of the immigrants in America. Then I discovered that the immigrants were American history. With those two frequently quoted sentences, so began a story that would go on to change how America saw itself, with profound consequences. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a Pulitzer Prize winner and the book he wrote that remade America. Life as a peasant in 18th century Europe wasn't easy. Despite generations of literature, movies, and video games that paint a rosy picture of idyllic agrarian lifestyles untarnished by modernity, peasant life was anything but ideal. Existing in a delicate balance between the pressures of their community, the land, and the authorities ruling over them, peasants survived only through strict social roles and obligations, where each individual knew what was expected of them from birth to death. But with the population growth and political changes of the 1800s, millions of peasants lost the ability to support themselves. Their choice was plain: move or perish. With grief in their hearts, they left the only lives they ever knew and set off on foot towards the Atlantic Ocean. Oscar Handlin was only 8 years old when he decided that he would be a historian. His parents, Russian Jewish immigrants who had fled persecution under the Tsar, strongly valued intellectual cultivation, and Oscar was constantly reading history books, even as he walked to make deliveries for his father's grocery store. This early intellectual blooming also made Oscar something of a rebellious student, and he progressed through his early public school education in fits and starts. But it was at Brooklyn College where Oscar found his focus. Surrounded by the student activism of the 1930s, Oscar remained independent and skeptical of simplistic solutions, instead preferring to immerse himself in the complexities of history. His listlessness now behind him, he graduated in 1934, ready to blaze ahead. Oscar moved on to Harvard University, where he earned his master's in 1935 and subsequently won a Frederick Sheldon Fellowship to conduct research in Europe. Setting out from Boston on his trip, Oscar crossed that same ocean as those peasant immigrants 100 years earlier.
As they lined up for the roll call, their curious gaze sought out the features of this, their unfamiliar home. The rising masts, the great folds of sail, the web of rigging, and the bold, pointed bowsprit. There was time before they passed through the estuary to the empty ocean to reflect on the long way they had come, to mingle with the hope and gratitude of escape, the sadness and resentment of flight.
In his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Uprooted, Oscar tells the story of the 35 million Europeans who migrated to the United States over the course of 150 years. He describes the journey from Europe to America as a harrowing one, both in the sea voyage itself and in the ports and trips across unfamiliar lands. It was the first time that peasants were forced to make decisions alone, without the community to guide them. But it wouldn't be the last. Settling mostly in cities during the rapid industrialization of America, the peasants' immigrant experience, according to Oscar, was primarily one of alienation. Alienation from the communities they had left in Europe and from the dominant culture they now found themselves in. Alienation even from the earth itself, as their agrarian lifestyles were transformed into ones of urban and factory labor.
Now he was to act within a realm of inanimate things. Senseless iron shapes will everlastingly be about him, and stone will hem him in, on city street, in mill or mine. He through whose hands all of production had then passed, from the dropped seed to the eaten bread, often now could not tell what manner of thing his labor made. Its shape, its quality, its function, such labor was labor for its own sake, and meaningless.
Oscar received his PhD in 1940 and joined the Harvard faculty, becoming one of the first full-time Jewish professors at the school. His dissertation had been about the immigrants of Boston in the 18th and 19th centuries, and he decided to explore the subject more fully in The Uprooted. Aimed at the general public rather than academia, The Uprooted is a poetically written, soulful account of the 19th century immigrant experience in America, mostly foregoing direct quotes or attributions in favor of imagining the inner lives, hopes, and fears of the people who found themselves on the shores of a bewildering new land. Published in 1951, the book had a powerful effect on the public's perception of immigration, which had all but ended by the 1950s after extremely strict and racist laws in 1921 and 1924 slowed migration to a trickle. It was this impression on the public that Oscar was able to leverage when he testified in front of Congress in support of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Passed in 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act abolished the earlier quota system, which had discriminated against Asians and other groups, and completely remade the demographics of immigrants entering the United States. Oscar Handlin has been recognized as a crucial behind-the-scenes influence in its passage. Oscar went on to have an immensely prolific writing career, with some labeling him the father of immigration studies. But like many fathers, Oscar did not always see eye to eye with successive generations. He came to develop a reputation for conservatism in academia when he resisted attempts by younger scholars to reanalyze history through the studies of race and gender. Having planted the study of history into fertile new ground, Oscar now found it being uprooted yet again. But if his writing is any indication, perhaps that precarity itself was essential. By the end of The Uprooted, Oscar contends that the alienation experienced by immigrants in the 19th century proved to be a defining characteristic of America. Lonely, poor, and desperate to hold on to what few traditions they could, immigrants pooled their meager resources to form community groups, to publish their own newspapers, to produce literature and theater. Divorced from the old villages of Europe, where strict obligations had directed so much of a person's life and decision-making, these new communities became laboratories of American politics and culture, breeding the kind of innovation that drove the nation's global ascent. And in that way, they became inseparable from the American story.
In our flight, unattached, we discovered what it was to be an individual, a man apart from place and station. In our flight through the newness, we discovered the unexpected, invigorating effects of recurrent demands upon the imagination, upon all our human capacities. We will not have our nest become again a moldy prison holding us in with its tangled web of comfortable habits.
In his 1973 edition of The Uprooted, Oscar wrote, "The book tells an epic story." At the time of writing, there was a possibility that it, like other epics, would have a tragic conclusion. 20 years later, there is still a possibility that it might not. Today, 50 more years have passed, and that story continues, as dramatic as ever. But the question remains for us as it did for those European peasants 200 years ago. Will we keep moving, or will we perish?